Hello, it's Mrs. Wallace. How are you? I'm just going to do this quick video on tariffs. This becomes, I think, an opportunity to just get a sense of some of the notes that students did in class, and I believe you were out that day, so this is just kind of a recap. We did look at comparative advantage earlier in the year and touched on some of these topics. So if this, kind of lingo rings a bell, see if these are familiar terms. When we are looking at international trade, we know that generally economists are going to see trade in a positive light, but sometimes countries decide to limit trade and to protect their domestic industries. They might do this for a variety of reasons. They might be interested in just kind of making the industries at home and they, have a little bit more profit. They might also be trying to be strategic about making sure that there's some products that are located within the country, rather than relying on countries that are far away. And during the pandemic, that was an issue, trying to get products from countries that were far away. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why countries sometimes might move away from trade, despite the fact that trade has many gains. But protectionism is this word that we use to describe the various policies that countries might use, basically to limit trade. And two of these policies that are, most important include tariffs and import quotas. And in this video, we'll primarily be looking at tariffs. Tariffs are taxes on imported goods. So if you're not trading, you don't have a tariff because you wouldn't have any imported goods. When you are bringing imported goods into a country from a variety of other countries or one other country, tariffs are a way to have the government gain some revenue. The government, by command, by law, will, create a tariff, and that tariff then gets placed on foreign goods. Okay, and we're interested in seeing what this looks like in a market graph of supply and demand. Look at this topic of tariffs, and we also saw this with taxes as additional ways that we could consider the supply and demand graph. Okay, we're looking at like extensions of supply and demand. So on the right, we have a supply and demand graph, and you can also see that gold line that says world price. For now, ignore that gold line, okay, and pretend that we just have the downward sloping demand curve, that's blue, and the upward sloping supply curve. And this is going to be representative of a market that is a domestic market in the United States. So the supply curve is red and is being represented by firms in the United States, okay, that make ceramic plates. The blue downward sloping demand curve is consumers in the United States, okay? So without trade, the intersection of supply and demand will give us information about the equilibrium price and quantity. We can see the equilibrium price is $15, and we can see the equilibrium quantity is $5, okay? So when quantity demanded is equal to quantity supplied at 5, the price is $15, okay? And we see the intersection of the demand and supply curves. This is not with trade, so there's not any tariff at this point. This is just a market where we have supply and demand. If this is a market that all of a sudden is going to invite some trade, so maybe we're going to have a whole bunch of foreign countries also make ceramic plates, and they're going to start sending them to the United States. Once we have trade, you'll notice the price ceiling that is the world price. Okay, the world price is often a price lower than the equilibrium price. Producers in the United States were able to get $15 for a plate. Now, because there's so much competition, the price is going to be lowered to $9. So producers at home are going to have to compete with foreign competitors, and they too are going to lower their price to $9. The competitors are making their price low at $9. That's what we're told based on this graph, that the world price is $9. So companies in the United States are going to also charge $9. If they charge 15, no one's going to buy their products because they have options at $9. If we kind of look along this $9 price here, you can see that as soon as you bump into the supply curve, that tells us at the price of $9, the producers at home, this supply curve is still made up of U.S. firms, okay? And it tells us at any given price what quantity will firms be willing to produce. So at the price of $9, firms in the U.S. are willing to supply three plates, three ceramic plates. But if you look at the price of $9, okay, we have a shortage because domestic suppliers will only supply three ceramic plates. But at the price of $9, we have a quantity demanded. The point on the demand curve for $9 actually tells us that the quantity demanded is 7, right? So quantity demanded is 7 plates, but only 3 are produced. So we have a shortage of 4 plates. Some people aren't going to get plates, but because we can trade, back when we looked at price ceilings and price floors, we determined that, well, you could have some inefficiency. Maybe this is a market's just going to underproduce plates. It's going to make 3 plates. But in this case, domestic producers will make 3 plates. They will fulfill the price of $9 at that point on the supply curve. But the rest of the quantity that's demanded, the 4 additional plates that consumers want, will come from trade. Okay, so if we were asked what goods are going to be imported, you can see on this the goods between 3 and 7. In other words, 4 million plates are going to be imported. And then once we know the quantity of plates, we can consider, well, what happens if we tax or place a tariff on that particular set of imported plates? It's only the imported plates that we're putting a tax on. Okay, so here's the world price of $9. And we have unrestricted trade. Domestic firms are going to be unable to charge more than the world price, kind of what we just did and went through a little bit. Domestic consumers are going to demand the 7 million plates. Suppliers are only doing 3, and so 4 million plates would be imported, okay? And that's what happens with trade. You can also see here this really important thing about consumer and producer surplus, okay? Without trade, okay, consumer surplus, which was at the equilibrium price of $15, the consumer surplus would have been the blue line, okay? Once we go down to the world price and consumers are able to buy a product at a lower price and get some imported goods, consumer surplus is going to be this whole giant amount of like the blue and this pink with the blue lines, and then also this green here. That's all consumer surplus, okay? That's really significant. So the gains from trade largely go to consumers. It's something we know about trade, but in this graph we can really see it. The other thing is that producer surplus decreased during the time of just the market with no world price, no trade. The producer surplus was below the price of $15, and using the supply curve, the producer surplus was this triangle right here. When the price gets lowered, producers are not incentivized to produce 5, they're incentivized to produce only 3. So we see producer surplus is going to be a much smaller triangle than it was before. Okay, so consumer surplus increases a great deal. Producer surplus decreases a great deal. That is the result of trade. Okay, if we want to get to what happens, there's our consumer surplus, there's our producer surplus. Okay, and that makes sense so far. I'm going to just note this. You can have a world price that happens to be above equilibrium. That's generally not the case. But if you did, and you had a situation where the world price was much greater than equilibrium, you would have an incentive for your suppliers to supply 7 million of the product of ceramic plates, but consumers in the United States to only demand 3 million plates. So in this case, when the world price is above equilibrium, you would actually export extra goods. Instead of saying you have a surplus, now firms would be able to export that surplus to someplace else. So it's not impossible to have a world price above equilibrium. That's generally not the case in reality, okay? And of course, you have, in that case, because it's a higher price, you'd have smaller consumer surplus and much larger producer surplus, okay? This brings us to what happens when we have a tariff. So at that world price of $9, we're going to imagine that there's a per unit tariff for $3 for each good. Every single good that's imported is going to have a $3 tariff. So we take this world price line of $9 and we add $3 to it to get the tariff. So it's like world price plus the $3 tariff. If the world price was $9, now the world price plus the tariff is at $12. So our new kind of price control, in a sense, is this line at $12. We can see, because the price is a little higher than $9, we see our suppliers at home, our domestic suppliers, are a little more incentivized to have additional plates be produced. So quantity supplied increases to 4. The quantity demanded, because now the price is a little bit higher than before, is going to be a little bit lower. So we're only going to see 2 million goods imported. The difference between 4 and 6 million, you can kind of see, looking at the quantity supplied and the quantity demanded, how we get that quantity of imported goods. And then in order to find out the tax revenue, we're going to use the area of a rectangle. Every single good that's imported, every single one of the 2 million goods that's imported will have a $3 tariff, okay? So 2 million times $3 will give us our tariff revenue. And you can figure that out by looking at the area of the rectangle. You can also quantify that in dollars. And tariff revenue, just like tax revenue, gets added to total surplus. So if we wanted to see, like, how efficient is this economy? Well, consumers have surplus, producers have surplus, the government also gains revenue. Those are all included in total surplus. One thing to note here, and you can see it actually, noted on the graph, we have deadweight loss on both sides of the tariff revenue. It's small triangles. The reason that this is deadweight loss is when we had trade and no tariff, these sections of deadweight loss would go to consumer surplus. Consumer surplus was massive, right? Remember that deep shaded blue line? So now that we have the tariff, that area that's not tariff revenue, not part of consumer surplus, now when the price is $12, the consumer surplus is the blue shaded area. The producer surplus is like the gold shaded area. Tariff revenue is the rectangle that's shaded. Those light shaded areas to the right and left of tariff revenue, that's going to be deadweight loss. It is the lost consumer and producer surplus as a result of the tariff. Okay, I hope that helped, and I will see you in class.